Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good today, thanks. And I want to thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the solar eclipse today at 2:30. With the sun, moon, and earth in alignment, it is an optimal time to attune the conscious mind with divine law. We will discuss the chart of the eclipse from Hampton with a stellium in the 9th house with a focus on higher learning. Listen as Swami explains the role of Mars in this lunation to become the warrior. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Remember to join our Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and learn to live in the house of the Lord. So, Swami, we have a pretty important day that's coming up. And the last time that we had a similar eclipse that crossed the United States was actually back in 1918. And its path will black out the entire midsection of the United States of America. But we want to really talk about what is it that we should be looking forward to with this solar eclipse today.
Well, again, I don't know that the eclipse causes as much as whatever it is that we bring to the table. If we have expectations that we're actually interacting with our environment, but using the eclipse because it is a biosphere of energy and getting behind that energy, because the eclipse is when the sun, the moon, and the earth are all in alignment. And what that symbolizes with regard to a metaphysical or mystical system is that matter, mind, and spirit are all in alignment. And that becomes an opportunity. And in Kriya Yoga, we call it initiation, where matter, mind, and spirit come together. And the instruction in Kriya Yoga is training your mind to serve spirit and then training your body to receive that image as your symbol for validation. And that's what starts the progressive cycle. That's what initiates or impregnates the seed of the conscious mind. And it starts the progressive cycle where we actually start to expand our field of awareness. But again, the eclipse will not do this if you do not participate with it, if you do not have the intention going into it. And another thing is for people that are doing this for the first time, it's very different than people that are initiated and kind of use these eclipses to renew their vow, kind of a thing, with divine law.
Well, it's interesting that you said that, because in the readings that I've done in preparation for the show, a lot of authors out there on the web are saying things like eclipses are typically the times when life-changing events will occur in your life. You know, and they give examples such as marriage, birth of a child, things like that, promotions, career changes, but also that solar eclipses can also be times of endings so that new beginnings can happen. So I do see what you're saying about renewing vows. This might be a good time for people to renew their vows, to either get back with their divinity or reunite themselves with their divinities.
Yeah, because that's optimal for just living in general. That's the secret to life, is to attune ourselves to divine law. And in Kriya Yoga, we recognize that there are things that we can actually do to help us participate with that biosphere of energy. And then there are things that we can do that creates discord and puts us out of harmony with what's trying to happen with an eclipse. And so again, a lot of it really has to do with an individual's level of consciousness, their degree of awareness.
Now, I was reading in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy yesterday, and one of the passages that she talks about is that to caution everybody in using astrology, because us being material beings, we have to understand that the planets are governed by divine law, by God. And so we have to understand that it is the God energy that is making everything happen. And for us to be just kind of caution ourselves on how we use the material, aspects around us in our daily lives.
Yeah, that again, some people approach astrology as if the movement of those planets are dictating their reality. But to use it more as a spiritual science, to use it to help you map out your development, that points of passage, rites of passage were important things in development. And an eclipse has a 2-year, 2-month, and 28-day cycle that as you start to plot that, you can start to maybe get some insight into what we call your collective purpose, that the universe gives us life, but it does expect us to give back. But a lot of us really, we don't know why we incarnated. And so using these tools, I think, can be really helpful, not so much as a form of superstition or even subliminal suggestion that this is going to be an opportune time for me, or this is going to be a difficult time for me. Those things, you can produce self-fulfilling prophecies with that type of information. But when you look at it kind of generically, and that the movement of the planets are the will of God, it's divine law, it's good information, provided that you do not become controlled by it.
Because if that happens, then we're turning to something that's material guiding our lives and not something that is divine and spiritual.
Yeah, and the interplay between matter and mind and spirit, I think, is where a lot of our collisions take place. That if all you're getting are your clues from the outside world, sensual perception, and that's a pretty good concept, especially for this eclipse, because in the chart that we have here for Hampton, New Hampshire, the eclipse falls in the 9th house, which is the house of the higher mind. It's in the sign of Leo, but it's also accompanied by Mars, the North Node, and Mercury. So there's a stellium in the 9th house. So higher learning is a really important theme for this next 2 years, 2 months, and 28 days for all of us. And trying to figure out, well, what's the difference between lower mind and higher mind sometimes can be confusing. And going to your 3rd house, or even say, for example, in this particular chart, Mercury is opposing Neptune. So Mercury is in Virgo in the 9th house, which is putting our attention into the concept of higher learning. And Neptune, which is actually a planet that is all about returning the individual to the unified state, which is really a lot of the operations of the higher mind, working from the oneness of all, seeing reality from a spiritual perspective as opposed to from a dualistic perspective, which is typically what happens when you're just getting your information from sensual perception through your senses, because our senses work with contrast. That's what duality is. Nothing is really whole in matter and mind. Everything is in half, but that's what makes things recognizable. Because of contrast, our senses perceive what's before them. Now, when you're dealing with and you're accustomed to getting all your information through your senses, then you are dealing with your lower mind, which is mortal, materialistic. It is in constant change. And the higher mind is immortal. And it's unchanging. And the other thing is that the higher mind is dealing with the unified state. So they're really, your sensual perception is zero.
So when you're talking about the higher mind, so make sure I understand, you're definitely not talking about in an academic sense. So if this is a time for the higher mind, how do we take advantage of that? Like, what are the processes that we should do to expand the higher mind? Is it study? Is it meditation? What exactly do we have to do to take advantage of this time?
The workings of the higher mind really is attuning ourselves to divine law. And so the way that you do that is thinking with God as God. So trying to attune yourself to a reality that is unified. And the clearer that we are about our concept of the divine, that you really want to get away from assigning human characteristics to a divine image with superhuman qualities kind of a thing, because that kind of reduces this relationship that we could possibly have with divine law. And so thinking with God as God, you have to understand that the realms of spirit it's all goodness. It's peace, it's love, it's happiness. And the concept of evil is just the absence of that. So attuning yourself to this life-moving, regenerating renewal of constant pouring out of goodness is really what your relationship with the divine is. Now, in order to be able to access that, we have to demonstrate it. And so divine law is really rooted in what we call virtue. So anything that is a positive virtue, principle-centered behavior, is how you would attune yourself and make that available to you. And then another thing that I try and do is I'd really try and make a distinction between information that we get from the lower mind, the third house, which could be maybe categorized as thoughts, and information that we get from the ninth house, which would be more in sync with ideas, that there is a difference. And to be able to follow the input that we get, and to be able to know the difference, because as you align yourself with your collective purpose, then you want to start to get your information from divine law, as opposed to your limited material, mortal senses.
Well, I think this is a good place for us to take a short pause to hear a word from our sponsors. So, listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, I know that we've got a few listeners out there on the line with us. So at this time, if any of you folks have any questions for Swami about the eclipse or any of the content we've talked about so far, here is your opportunity to speak out and ask Swami any questions. So I think what we'll do, Swami, is I will continue to ask some questions that I can anticipate from our listeners. So I want to get back to talking about the difference between what you were talking about, thoughts and ideas. And I believe you were saying that ideas come from a divine sense and thoughts come from mortal mind. But can you give us an example of what each one might mean so we can determine ourselves if what we're getting into our mind, is it from the divine sense or is it from the mortal sense?
Well, to answer your question, I mean, that would be really difficult for me to do for somebody. With regard to doing things like that, a lot of it just has to do with trial and error. You're kind of groping through, trying to figure out what is my collective purpose, who am I, and basically what you really look for is harmony. If what you are doing, bringing peace, goodness, happiness, those are important clues that you are in harmony with divine law-seeking expression. If there's discord, if you're having problems, if there's difficulty, then you are out of sync. So I would say that would be the way to measure that.
Well, I was just curious because sometimes we will get a thought and we think it's coming from something higher than ourselves, and it's still coming from the mortal mind and not the immortal mind that you were talking about earlier. So I was just trying to find, how would we know? Would it be a feeling? Would it feel more harmonious? You know, that type of thing. So I was just kind of wondering if there was any clarification there.
Well, yeah, to answer your question, it would be a harmonious feeling. And if there was any kind of difficulty with it, then you would want to maybe revisit the origins of that insight.
Hmm. Now, you had mentioned earlier that Leo, we have the total solar eclipse in Leo. Are there things that we can learn from that, the solar eclipse in Leo this time?
Well, we talked a lot about that in the last astrology program that we did, was the whole concept of loyalty. And when you are creating a relationship with the divine, it is a mutually exclusive relationship, that it really is not a mix of all different types of approaches, that you turn your sense of self over to divine law. And loyalty is an important part of that, that you don't vacillate, that you must be completely devoted to your relationship with divine law. And when you are attuning yourself to the Almighty, then a lot of it has to do with giving up personal desire. And that's where, in this particular chart, you have Mars that is in the ninth house, but it's also involved in a kind of a grand trine. Mars is trining Saturn from the first house in Sagittarius, and it's kind of wide, but it's applying to Uranus in the fifth house in Aries. So the whole thing of the warrior, that the warrior really is obedient to a higher law than personal interest. And attuning yourself to divine law requires us to really give up personal interest. And Mars is how we get what we want. And then the other planet that is also associated with desire is Venus. And Venus is kind of involved in almost a grand cross, cardinal grand cross. That Venus is squaring Uranus. Venus is in the eighth house, the house of renewal and transformation. And it's in the sign of Cancer, which is all about nurturing and bringing things into form and protecting what it is that we put into form. And so Venus is squaring Uranus, which Uranus has a lot to do with new insights that would actually come from divine law. And it's squaring Jupiter, which is kind of like the planet for the higher mind. Jupiter is in the 10th house in this particular configuration, and that might be creating some sort of tension around lofty aspirations and divine ideas before the general public. And then the other thing is that it's in kind of a wide opposition, separating opposition from Pluto. But I really think the residual effects of that opposition from Pluto you can stand on that for the concept of transformation. And transformation in this is very different than just change. It's more of the chemical change that happens when we really change the frequencies that we resonate to. That's where a big part of a metaphysical or a mystical system, that the physics of spirituality is like attracts like. And you're not just trying to intellectually do this. You really are recognizing that we as human beings are transmitting, receiving instruments. And by attuning ourselves to the higher mind, to divine law, then you become spiritual, which is very different than thinking or trying to be spiritual. that your relationship is a realization. And then following divine law becomes somewhat easier when all your ducks are in order, as opposed to if you are kind of muscling your way through this and using willpower and using a lot of your material mortal mind, as opposed to turning it over to your immortal spiritual mind, the will of God.
You do make it sound like everything is in order for us to desire nothing. The void, the spirit. It sounds like everything is all in place for us to really take advantage of this particular time period, to be able to have that realization, that relationship with our divinity.
Right. And then also recognizing the benefits that would come with that. When you back yourself with peace, love, happiness, and goodness, when you indulge yourself. And the other thing is that you feel connected to something that's pure, powerful, and sacred.
And this is probably, I think you had mentioned this before, but I just wanted to touch upon it real briefly. When you had talked about demonstrating the qualities of the higher mind, to the capital M, can you give us an idea what those qualities might be?
Well, I like to use the ones we use when we do the salutations. Being brave, being thrifty, being cheerful, being helpful, being loyal, being clean, being courteous, trustworthy, friendly, kind. That is actually the Boy Scout law that we use when we do the salutations. But those are great attributes to attune yourself with divine law. Anything that is positive and moving lifeward and filled with love, and not misconception of love, but more like the concept of agape, which is unconditional giving. It's God's love for humanity.
Wow, what a great show. There is a lot going on. And so I think it's almost about that time. We do have to start shutting down our program for the day. So listeners, closing, I would invite you out there to visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com. So once you're there, you can post comments about this show or give us ideas about future shows that you would like us to do for you. And keep those comments, questions, curiosities coming, because Swami does enjoy hearing from you. Be sure to tune in next week. We'll have another great show for you. And also be sure to listen to our weekly Facebook Live videos that we have on there that we'll be posting around Wednesday at 5 o'clock. So, Swami, do you have any other final thoughts or comments on today's program?
Well, I would like to wish everybody a happy solar eclipse day, and hopefully we'll get some of it anyway. And the other thing is that the dates for this particular eclipse, with regard to the phases of the moon that correspond with it, that I will post them on the website for anybody's interested. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste.
And happy solar eclipse to everybody out there. And so thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.